Good morning. Welcome to this latest Mobility Ways Thought Leadership webinar. My name is Graham Bannister, and I'm delighted to welcome Nicky Perfect as our guest presenter for today's session, Behaviour Change Tactics from a Hostage Negotiator. Given the work Mobility Ways undertakes in accelerating sustainable travel, hostage negotiation may seem a rather left field topic. However, I'm confident you will find the actionable insights from today extremely useful in driving forward the sustainability agenda within your organisation. Before I hand over to Nicky to fully introduce herself, a little transport context to today's session. Emissions from transport are stubbornly persistent. Transport is responsible for 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and this share is rising with our places and communities becoming ever more clogged and congested by vehicles. The commute, Mobility Ways' area of expertise, is the single biggest source of transport emissions. Electrification will help reduce carbon, but continuing as we are will not deliver the congestion and air quality improvements that society as a whole urgently needs. Unfortunately, as is being evidenced, tackling transport emissions is proving difficult. Social acceptance by the majority and deep-rooted associations with aspiration and lifestyle have created a transport system centred around private car dependency with far too many single occupancy trips, particularly prevalent to and from one's place of work, which means that influencing travel behaviours is hard. It requires negotiation and collaboration, hence the rationale for this webinar. I'm delighted Nicky joins us today to share experiences and introduce tactics to frame and influence behaviour change within your organisation. Nicky has around 45 minutes of content to share, which means there should be some time for questions, so please add these along with any queries, comments as they come to you via the Q&A function. If we don't get to all of them during the webinar, we will follow up over email. Also, a reminder this session is being recorded and a link to the video will be circulated afterwards. So, as I hand over to Nicky, and ask of you all to get proceedings underway. There's a question on the screen now and a QR code to access Slido where you can answer. If you can start filling that in, that'll be fantastic. Thanks for your participation today. Nicky, over to you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. We've got about 45 minutes together, and I want it to be an interactive session. So if you are taking notes, just relax for a bit. Let's make it interactive so things can stick with you. And I intend to give you some tactics and some strategy and a little bit of theory as well as to why these things work and how the human brain works and what we do as human beings when change is upon us. If you could just start thinking about that question and just start to engage in the Slido activity, because what we will do during the session is we will look at these biggest resistances to change and we'll think about how we can use that in our conversation, our negotiation with people around persuading them and collaborating. I mean, collaborating is key because that's where you get your win-win, and collaborating with people to influence them to change their patterns of behavior. Right. I'm going to share my screen now. So hopefully all of you have just started to take the picture of that QR code because that's going to disappear in a second. This is me. We're going to talk about behavior change tactics. I believe some of you have heard me speak already. So please, if you have, please laugh at the same jokes and listen to some of the similar stories. And I'm going to tell you about behaviour change from my perspective as a hostage and crisis negotiator. And just before we came on air, it was interesting. I was talking to Graham about Christmas is coming here in the UK. And often we have to negotiate our way through there. So the tactics that you'll learn today can not only be used at work to influence behaviour change, but they can also definitely be used at home if you are negotiating Christmas at the moment. Before we start, of course, I like to address the elephant in the room, which is my surname. My surname really is perfect. As my dad always says to my mum, he was born perfect and she only became it when she met and married him. We lost my dad a couple of years ago, so I always tell that joke in memory of him. Let me tell you a little bit about me for those of you that haven't met me before. I know there's a biography out there about me, but let me just share my story. And the reason I share my story with you is just so that you get to know about my background and the experiences that I've had. So I am I was an international hostage and crisis negotiator turned trainer. So what does that mean? So for 31 years, I was a police officer in the Metropolitan Police in London. And the last decade of that, I was a hostage and crisis negotiator. For those of you that don't know, in the UK, the majority of hostage and crisis negotiators do it on top of their day job. So they go to work, do their normal role, whatever that might be, and then they put themselves on call to ensure that there is a team of hostage and crisis negotiators across the UK 24/7. At the time that I joined, there was a full-time unit of just 6 people who worked out of New Scotland Yard, and they were responsible for helping in international situations as well. To be honest with you, I thought I was quite a good communicator before I became a negotiator. I based this on previous experience. I'd got 20 years in policing. I was a firearms officer, so I'd done lots of courses. I was an advanced driver. And when I turned up for my hostage and crisis negotiation course, I was probably a little bit arrogant and thinking, well, this will be okay. I've done other courses. This isn't going to be so bad. And yet when I had that 2-week course, an incredibly intensive course, they changed my belief system and how I started to communicate and negotiate with people. They taught me a completely different system, a system to build relationships with people very quickly in very challenging circumstances. And I had an epiphany moment and suddenly realized that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my career and the rest of my life. And after 5 years of being like a volunteer hostage and crisis negotiator, I managed to get onto that full-time unit, and I became the director of UK training a couple of years later. So I was responsible for the majority of negotiators going through that course and then managing them throughout their career. In London, we have generally a kidnap once a week, mainly gang on gang, drug related. And so although 90% of my time was dealing with people in crisis, talking to people who are making decisions about whether to live or die that day, my other sort of 8% was dealing with people in kidnaps, supporting families, and then a smaller percentage of working with Her Majesty's government if a British national got caught up in an incident across the world. So that's a little bit about my story. I left policing in 2018. I ended up randomly buying my local village garage and setting up a community centre. And I also wrote a book called Crisis, which you can see on your screen if you're looking for a Christmas present. There's my quick plug for my book. I happen to be a holder of a British Empire Medal from 2022 of the Queen's New Year's Honours List, and I got that for meritorious service to the community from our community centre and looking after them during the pandemic. So that's a little bit about me. Really grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening to me. Now, I am sure you have heard this phrase on a number of occasions, that communication is a soft skill. Today, really, I'd like to challenge that and turn it on its head and suggest to you that communication is a life-changing skill. And communication is the fundamental of any influence that we are going to have. We cannot influence people, we cannot negotiate people unless our communication is good. And often we think that we're very good communicators, but we find that we are coming at the way that we're talking to the other person from our perspective. And we'll talk about perspective and belief systems as we go through today over the next half an hour or so. Now, most of our conversations are unconscious with no purpose. So when we want to influence somebody to change their behavior, whether that is to take a step back from the edge of a building, or whether that is to travel to work in a different way, or whether that is we're changing team dynamics, or whether that is we're having Christmas in a different place this year, whatever it might be, we have to be consciously present. And that sounds very easy to do, but it's actually one of the hardest parts of communication, is to be fully consciously present with the other person and to be having a conversation with purpose. Negotiation is quite a strong word. Often people think that it can be a bit scary and that I'm a bit worried about it. It makes some people nervous. But I have always been taught that negotiation is just a conversation with a purpose. And when we think about that and we start to think, okay, so I have to go and speak to people about change, what's my purpose? And it might be that your negotiation is a series of conversations. I honestly don't believe that we will solve everything in one conversation. Definitely not in the world of hostage and crisis negotiation. Definitely not in the world of business. Negotiation is often a series of conversations. And I say that because sometimes I think we worry about getting everything sorted in one conversation, and that actually it's building a relationship with people. And there's a lot of background work that goes before that influence and persuasion. Here is my amazing picture of an iceberg. As you can see, I have no qualifications in creative drawing. The line across the top of the iceberg is, of course, the sea. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because most of our conversations are tip of the iceberg. They're what I call safe conversations. They are based on what I want you to see and what you want me to see. And often, under that tip of that iceberg, under that resistance, that emotional pushback that you might be getting when you're having conversations about change, is a lot of beliefs, values, experiences, emotions, and often what has just happened. So let's discuss. I would like you, Jackson, if we can just have a look at the Slido, let's have a look at some of those main resistances. And if you haven't dropped anything into the Slido yet, can I encourage you to do that? And let's get really specific. Let's get really specific about this. You know, what are those main resistances? Great, lovely, thank you. So we've got other commitments on the commute. We've got the school run, apathy, walking. It's convenience, yeah, but we love a bit of convenience, don't we? Laziness, unreliable public transport. That's good because I think I put that on my slide, so that's great. Infrastructure, habit, I've always done it this way. Fear of change, ignorance, inconsistent, cost more money, constraints. Lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'd like us to go one step further now, and let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go deeper into that. So when we talk about the main resistance and we talk about travel, is it because I have to drop the kids off at school first and then come to work? Because that's a little bit different than just it's an inconvenience. What is it that's making it inconvenient? So we're going to ask that next layer of questioning. What is it that makes it inconvenient? Takes longer than driving, yeah. Okay. So let's start thinking a little bit deeper. What is it about these other things? And if you can continue in the Slido, thank you for those that are participating already. We're asking that next level of question. What is it about this specific thing that makes it this? Okay, great, lovely. Because when we start to think like this and we start to ask some more open, deeper questions, what happens is we get to that heart of the matter. So in our iceberg, we've got all these resistant things to change. It's mainly all about us, by the way, as our conversations are all about us. If you think about yourself and change, if somebody comes in and gives you an idea and you're not sure about it, think about how resistant you are to it. And it's generally a little bit deeper. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Great. And I want you to hold some of those thoughts, because when we do a bit of a practical, we'll be looking at a couple of these reasons, and we'll be looking at something called predictive dialogue of how we can then manage our responses and what we say to other people. That's great. Thank you very much. Right, let me just come back to my screen. There we go. So here are some of the barriers to change, some of the main barriers that we see, our values and beliefs, and we'll talk a bit about beliefs in a minute and how strong they are. Our convenience and habit. again, they play a huge part, and that you've already mentioned those on the Slido. Lack of viable options, which has been mentioned, and the cost and the effort of change. Let's have a look at a little bit about beliefs before we go any further. Now, those of you that have seen me speak before, you'll have heard the story about my first ever negotiation and what I learned from that. For those that haven't seen me before, I'm going to give you a very condensed version of that story. But my first ever hostage and crisis negotiation taught me how powerful beliefs are. I got a call to go and speak to a young man who had just been released from prison for grievous bodily harm. He'd gone round to see his ex-partner. They had a child together, a child he'd never seen before, and they had a heated emotional discussion. During that discussion, she alleged that he had assaulted her, but he'd taken the child without her permission. There'd been a car chase around London, and he was now in the car, holding the child up like a shield, locked all the doors, refusing to talk to anybody. And I was asked by my negotiator coordinator, the person running the negotiation across London for that evening, if I could go and negotiate with the young man in the car for his safe release and also the safe release of the child. Now, in a negotiation in London, you get a fast car to take you to the scene. And I was waiting for my fast car. And I had all these thoughts going through my head, all about me thoughts. And they were a little bit like this. Heroin negotiator arrives on scene, which is clearly me. Had a great conversation with the young man in the car. He opens the door, shakes her by the hand, hands her the child, and everything is fine. Now, of course, it didn't work out like that at all. And for 8 hours, he didn't actually speak to me. He said two things to me. Number one is, you don't understand. And number two, I won't repeat on a Thursday. And I walked away from that negotiation. The child was safe, but the young man ended up being tasered and there was a big fight. And I'd walked away from that negotiation questioning quite a lot of things. And I wondered why it hadn't worked, why these new skills hadn't worked. And suddenly I realized after quite a few months, probably even years, I'm still learning now, by the way, I definitely don't have it all right, was that whole conversation was about me, what I believed to be true. And he didn't see this heroin negotiator coming towards him to have a great conversation. He saw a white, middle-aged, middle-class woman, probably thought, well, what have we got in common? And also probably looked at me as if I was going to take his child away and send him back to prison. So he had a completely different belief system about that particular incident. I remember talking to a young girl standing on the edge of a building, and we were having a conversation, and she said to me, nobody cares about me. Now, as a person, I genuinely care about people, and I certainly cared about her in that moment. Now, her belief system was, nobody cares about me. And I said, I do. Now, you can imagine the response I got. She was like, how can you care about me? You don't know about me. You have no idea who I am. I got an emotional response for her, pushback. And the reason I got that is because I was challenging a really strong belief that she had. And her belief was, nobody cares about me. And here I am, a complete stranger, saying, well, I care about you, so the whole world's going to be great. So I get that emotional pushback. Now, these are extreme circumstances. But I have the same with my teams. I have the same with my family. When I challenge their belief system, I get an emotional response. And we are the same. When we have a belief system and when somebody challenges it, let's call it an opinion, a really strong opinion. There is a reason they say do not talk about politics and religion, because they're very strong beliefs, and they cause conflict across the world when those beliefs are challenged. So if you think about yourselves and your strong belief systems, when somebody challenges that, it feels like they're challenging us. And so what happens is we give an emotional response. And this is what's happening when you're talking to your teams about this change. You know, it's inconvenient for them. It doesn't fit with their world. They're very used to doing something a specific way. There is a belief system about rights. There is one of the biggest arguments I've ever seen in policing was around where you park your car in your street. It caused so many disputes and conflict amongst neighbours, car parking, which sounds so simple, but creates this emotional state. So I want you to imagine that your brain is split into two, nice and simple. You have an emotional side and you have a logical side. There is a great book called the chimp paradox, which explains this very clearly and in much more detail than we're going to go into today. He talks about the emotional state being 5 times stronger than the logical state. So our unconscious immediate reaction is to give an emotional pushback when we feel challenged. It's a protection mechanism derived from our fight, flight, or freeze. It keeps us safe. So when we have these conversations, even now, that's what you're getting. You're getting that fight, flight, or freeze. You're getting that reaction. And this is generally what happens when people are in the emotional side of the brain. They'll become aggressive, so they might talk over people, or they'll talk about people, or they'll use dismissive language. And you've probably experienced this as you try to sell traveling in a different way. And when we're selling things, people buy into us. It doesn't matter what business we're in, we're all in the business of people at some stage. So it's how do we build those relationships when we're getting this? And I'm sharing this with you so you know what to expect. You're already on the Slido sharing some of these responses that you're getting. Or people might completely avoid the issue. They'll keep quiet in meetings or conversations and they won't participate. And then what happens when people start to become submissive and avoid is they become resentful. And then you get that emotional pushback because they are feeling resentful. I'm not being treated fairly. I'm not valued as a human being. The majority of human beings I have found across the world, of course, there's a big caveat that there are differences. The majority of people that I have come into conversation with or negotiation with, they just want to feel valued and validated, and they just want to feel heard. And when they feel heard, that's when they're in the logical side of the brain. They can listen to different perspectives. It's okay to have a different point of view. There's nothing wrong with conflict as long as we treat people with kindness and respect and listen to their ideas and share ideas. And then we have that collaboration. And collaboration is key, because if you don't have collaboration, then often what happens is the person won't continue with the change behavior. So from my old world, an example of that would be, I'm talking to somebody, we have a relationship, I'm able to influence their behavior, that they walk away from the edge of the building with me and they get some help. Now, if I had jumped on them, forced them into that action, handcuffed them to the bridge, some of you may be smiling about that, but that definitely happens. I've seen that happen. Then that person will probably be in a very similar position in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever it might be. Whereas if we collaborate and get them on board, what happens is that the behavior will change for much longer time, because they think they're in control, or they feel like they're in control. And when we're in control, it's much easier for us to change the way that we think and that we feel. Here are some words that I thought might be quite useful for you, especially when we have a difference of opinion. These are some of the words to avoid. I understand how you feel. Now, often when people are saying, no, I can't do that because I need my car to drop the children off, I've got to run my elderly parents to the hospital, and then I come to work. So it's inconvenience. And you can see that this is a very strong feeling from them. And if we say, oh yeah, I understand how you feel, we will get a pushback. They'll be like, no, you don't. You've got no idea how I feel. They might not say it out loud, but they'll be saying it in their head, and they'll be pushing back from you. Another one is, if you have somebody who perhaps is showing quite a lot of emotion, to say calm down. Perhaps you can relate to this. I can definitely relate to this. If anybody ever tells me to calm down, the reaction that they get is, I'm calm, or something similar. And perhaps you can relate to that. Hopefully that's not just me. The word but. The word but is key. Now, we know the human brain only hears the sentence after the word but. It doesn't hear the bit before. So if you say to me something along the lines of, oh, you're doing really well, but I don't hear that you're doing really well. Or I can hear how distressing this is for you, but you've undone all the good work that you were doing around reflecting back that emotion of what people are telling you and how they're feeling. Now we're doing a series of free webinars, and we'll go more into language in some of the other webinars, and we'll go more into the listening skills and how you can use reflective language to build relationships in those other webinars. For today, we're just going to look at predictive dialogue and avoiding that conflict initially. Again, you may have a specific phrase that you use that is comfortable for you. It can cause conflict and it can cause pushback. And some of those words are, the common ones are mate, love, darling, sir. So just think about the language that you're using. Become more conscious of the way that you're communicating. Here's a couple of phrases for you to use. I accept. So when somebody is giving you that pushback and challenging what you're saying, let's use the word I accept. I accept your point of view. Please don't then put a button afterwards. I accept your point of view. And this is what I'm seeing. So when we change the word to and, they hear both sides of the sentence. I respect and I appreciate. If we can start using words like that, we keep rapport. It helps us to build a relationship, helps us to influence and persuade the other person. I love this slide because it shows the world so easily how perspective matters. It's such a simple thing. You know, one of us is going to have to move so that we can see what perspective is. Yeah, it's a 6. No, it's a 9. It's a 6. It's a 9. We can argue the whole time about what we believe to be true, what the other person believes to be true, and never collaborate and never move forward. If we can just press the big pause button and go, hang on a second, I'm going to come and stand where you're standing. Oh yeah, I can see that. I can see that now. Can you come and stand where I'm standing? Oh yeah, I can see that. Great. So now we're getting to see each other's point of view and perspective. Let's look at predictive dialogue. Now, predictive dialogue is a tool where it looks like you can see into the future. If we take some of the reasons that people give you pushback, and we're going to do an interactive session here, some of the reasons that people give you pushback, then we can start to formulate in our own mind 3 to 5 reasons why something should or shouldn't happen. And I'll give you some examples from my old world, and I'll give you some examples from my business world, and I'll give you some examples from family life. Before we go into that interactive session, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the power of because. So the word because has been found to be incredibly powerful in the world of influence and persuasion. Another book for you to go and have a look at is The Laws of Influence and Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And in there, they've done some research around this word because. And the experiment that they did was all based around a photocopier. For those of you that remember those days where you had to queue to get at the photocopier to get all those bits of paper done for meetings, and there was always a queue, mainly at lunchtime. And they asked somebody to go along and see if they could get in front of the queue at the photocopier. So first of all, they just went along and started asking people, oh, do you mind if I just go in front of you in the queue? Do you mind if I just go in front of you in the queue? And they found that actually people are quite generous when you do this and ask people outright. And about 63 to 65% of people said, yeah, no problem at all, you can go in front of me. So then they said, well, let's try because. Let's give them a reason why we want to go in front of them. And they did this. Do you mind if I go in front of you? Because my boss has got a really important meeting this afternoon and I need to get these papers photocopied. And it went up to 95% of people. 95% of people were, yeah, of course, please go in front of me, do your photocopying. And then they were like, well, hang on a sec, is it the reason or is it the word because? So the next step of the experiment was to go, do you mind if I go in front of you in the queue because I need to photocopy these papers? An obvious reason for standing in a queue in a photocopier. But what they found was it only dropped 2% down to 93%. And people still let them go in front of them. So it's the word because. If you give me a reason why something should or shouldn't happen, I'm more likely to change my thinking or change my behavior or see the world from your perspective. So how does this work in your world practically? Let's have a look. Let's do that exercise. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to open a whiteboard. Let's have a quick look here. There we go. One of the things I love about Zoom is that you can have a whiteboard. So let's have a look at one of the most common reasons that people are pushing back. Jackson, sorry, can you just bring the Slido up again? And I'll just take one of the most common reasons off the Slido and we'll use that. I'll stop sharing so you can do that. Lovely, thank you. Habit, I've always done it this way. Comfortable, convenience. Okay, let's have a look at convenience. I'll just take that as the one that we'll look at. Right, let's have a look at that. Okay, I'll just open the whiteboard again. She says confidently, good at communication, not so good at tech. There we go. Right, so you can do this at before you have a difficult meeting with somebody. Okay, you can do this before you have a difficult meeting with somebody, or with somebody you know is going to be very resistant to what you're saying. So we're going to put convenience in the middle here. Ooh. There we go, convenience in the middle. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 to 5 objections around convenience. 3 to 5 objections around convenience. So I would like you, this is the bit where we're going to do this together. I would like you to write in the chat for, some reasons why convenience comes up as an objection. Why does convenience come up as an objection? So if you can just write in the chat for me, why does this come up? You can even write it on the whiteboard. You should have access to the whiteboard. If you haven't, just write it in either the Q&A or the chat. So what are some of the reasons around convenience that people give to you? So we're going next level down. What is some of the reasons around convenience? Here we go. We don't have, okay, you don't have access to the chat. They are busy. Okay, thank you. Let's have a look at they are busy. So when we're talking about they are busy, we're talking about them. Okay, what else? Status quo bias. So they've got a bias around it. Yeah. Bring that over there. What we've got? Don't have time. Don't have time. What else have we got here? Any other way will waste time. Okay, so wasting time. Again, that sounds like they don't have time. Quicker to drive. Journey takes longer. Takes more thought and planning. Let's use that one. There's a lot about time around here. This is interesting. A lot about time. Public transport takes longer. So let's say it's more thought and planning. So we've got 5 reasons here as to what it is about the convenience, that they are busy. They've got a bias around it, that they don't have time and that they're wasting time and it requires more thought and planning. So the next stage, so now we've got 5 kind of reasons. We're going to have a look at, well, what's this busy look like? What does this busy actually look like? So let's go a little bit deeper. What does busy look like? What reasons are they giving to you for being busy? What reasons are they giving to you that they are busy? Or have we not had that conversation yet? Why are they busy? So this is where we're going deeper into that iceberg. Why are they busy? Why are they busy? Let's have a look. Childcare. Thank you. So one of the things is because they're busy around childcare. Let's stick with childcare so that we stay within time. Let's stick with childcare. What are the issues around childcare? What are the specific issues around childcare? Have a look, Q&A. Dropping off the children, yeah. Getting them ready to leave the house. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole negotiation world in itself, getting the kids to leave the house. Set, start and finish times. That's interesting. Set, start and finish times. Okay, great. And that's a real worry for people, right? So that is a balancing act that some people have to do around set, start and finish times. So how can we start to give them 3 to 5 reasons about how they can still use a different way of traveling that's beneficial to them? So let's think about that. I'm going to create a new whiteboard and we're going to look specifically at set, start and finish times. Set, start and finish times. So let's look at some reasons. I want you to give me some reasons around using public transport, how that's going to help me with my set, start and finish times. I'm going to have to think outside the box here. So now we're going to positively frame this. How can getting public transport improve, or how can they use public transport and still manage their set, start and finish times? We want 3 to 5 reasons beneficial to them. So let's start putting these in the Q&A, please. What are the beneficial things to them around set, start and finish times? Trains have set times so you can plan your journey. Okay, great. And then if routine, thank you. Yeah, yeah, but what happens if the train is late? You probably get the pushback on that. What happens if the train is late? Okay, the train is late, then let me know and we can work around that. There's going to be some flexibility. Won't walk to bus train stop. Would have to leave the office earlier and arrive later. So Jennifer, when you say would have to leave the office earlier and arrive later, have you got flexibility for them to do that? Because if you have, perfect, because that's a conversation that we can have. Here we go. We can add 3 to 5 reasons of positivity towards the other person. And one of them is we can change, we can be flexible. So now we can have some collaboration. You're flexible, you're coming to work in a different way. I can be slightly flexible. I don't know if that's true in your organization, but if it's a possibility, let's use that. Yes, but it would actually leave very little time in the office. Okay, interesting. So we might have to rethink how we're going to frame that. What about, I saw another one, no need to find parking. So that's a benefit, right? So no need to find parking. What if people got the train and actually on their journey to the office, they can start, and I'm just going to use, I was talking about commuting to London. I used to commute to London quite a lot. And on the train, I always clear my email. So when I walk into the office, my head is clear and I'm ready for the day. Is that a possibility? Can they do that work on the train, which will then save them some time when they're in the office? Can that work? No need to find parking. Could it be a little bit less stressful getting public transport? So by the time that they arrive, they've managed to plan a few things because they're not driving in. There's a positive. So as you can see, we have to think a little bit outside the box. We have to think about our because. What is it that's beneficial to them? And the more beneficial that you make it to them, the better and more on board they will be. So think about those responses that people give to you. It takes a little bit of time to think about them and start to do this. This doesn't take very long. It just helps you to go into it a little bit more. And it helps you to start thinking about, okay, well, what does the world actually look like from their perspective? And how can I change that? Let me get rid of that. And then lastly, in the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to give you something called the 4 Ps. which is how we can have conversations and make them more purposeful and plan for them a little bit more. See, I made a mistake. I pressed start at the beginning rather than start the slide. So 4 Ps. Before you have any challenging or difficult conversation, think about your purpose. Why are you having that conversation in the first place? What's important about it? What does success look like for you at the end of it? And the reason we start to do this is because it helps us to become more conscious, to be more purposeful in our conversations with people, and to start to think a little bit deeper. The second one is the plan for the what ifs. So you're going to sit down with your team and you're going to explain to them and encourage them to change their thinking patterns. What if? Yeah, what if my train is late? What if this? What if that? What if they keep being resistant? How will you onboard them? You know your teams better than I do. How will you onboard them? And as we go through these series of free webinars, we'll talk more about the power of listening, the power of reflective language, looking at the world from their perspective. What's really going on? What is it about this dropping children off? Because that sounds to me like they're incredibly busy, probably a little bit overwhelmed. And if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm always going to be looking at the world from an emotional state rather than a logical state. How can I help with that overwhelm that they will then be able to see a different way? What can I do to help them? We talked about perspective quite a bit already during this presentation. And then I'm going to say this to you, practice, because communication really is a skill. And all aspects of any skill need to be practiced. And especially when you're being more conscious about it, and especially when those conversations are more challenging, they're more difficult, you've got a strategy now. You've got some tips around words to use and words not to use. You've got a strategy of, okay, let me just get a piece of paper right in the middle here. What's the biggest objection that Jane is going to give me or Brian's going to give me to traveling in a different way? And why is that important to them? What are their values? What are their beliefs? Oh, right, I see that. And how can I use that now in a predictive dialogue? And it might be, so let me give you an example from my previous world about putting this all together. I get called to the scene of a post office. Inside the post office is an armed man. He came today thinking that everything would be fine, that he'd take the money from the post office, off he'd go, and he'd probably be on a plane to the Bahamas by now. But his plans haven't worked out quite as well as he was expecting. And now he's stuck inside the post office surrounded by armed police officers. As he looks out of the window, he's going to see armed police officers and blue flashing lights everywhere. So I am now going to take all of my experience and all my knowledge and think about what are the things that he is going to say to me as soon as I pick up the phone and introduce myself. And one of them is likely to be, get the armed police officers away. Okay, why is he going to say that to me? Why is he going to be resistant to having the building surrounded by armed police officers? Probably he's in fear of his life. Probably he watches a lot of TV and sees people getting shot. Probably because he can't see a way out at the moment, and probably because he doesn't want to be there. So I'm going to take all of that with my little spider diagram of surrounded by armed police, get the police officers away, and I'm going to have 3 to 5 reasons, and I'm going to say it in my very first conversation with him. And the conversation will be a bit like this. You're probably looking out of your window and you can see lots of armed police officers. And I'm wondering, because you're not saying you're right, I'm wondering if that's making you quite nervous and that you're fearful that they are going to shoot you. And I'm going to leave it there. So I'm only going to use one of my reasons. I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to see what I get back. And what happens is when we do this with other people, they feel valued and validated. They feel that you are trying to understand the world from their perspective. And it'll be the same with the people that you want to change their way that they travel to work or change of any sort of behavior. They want to feel valued and validated. They want to feel listened to. They want to understand that their objections are important to them. And now you have a strategy that you can practice and put into place where when you have that very first conversation, you could say, just use Brian for an example. Well, Brian, I've been thinking a lot about how you might feel about this new change in policy. And I'm wondering, and I'm not saying that I'm right, but I'm wondering if you feel it might be problematic for you because you've got a couple of kids under the age of 8 and you've got to get them to school. And I'm wondering if that is true, what we can do to collaborate together to make that a bit easier for you. And Brian's going to be like, of course, he's still going to be resistant, but he's going to be like, I like you. I like you because you're seeing the world from my perspective and you're tapping into my thoughts, and I feel valued and validated as a human being. That is a whistle-stop tour in 45 minutes, but hopefully it's giving you some tactics and a strategy now that you can go away and practice. Now, this is me. This is where I can be found. I was saying to Graham, it's quite funny because I am currently doing 24 tips to navigating Christmas on my social media, just like little 1-minute videos. But those 1-minute videos can be used in exactly the same way that we're having this conversation today on the webinar. So thank you very much for listening to me, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions, Graham. Let me stop sharing my screen, come off that. There we go.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Nicky. Yeah, perfect. We have time for questions. I mean, this is obviously part 1 of 3, I believe.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
With part 2 is scheduled for, I think it's the 23rd of January. So yeah, I think a link's already been put in to register for that one. But yeah, hopefully as many of you as possible can see it through all 3 parts. I guess for me, I was fascinating. I was really thinking deeply about, the work that we're trying to do, both in mobility ways and when I think about it in terms of my own passion for this topic, which is getting more people to use their own car less. It's, I'm quite comfortable with that as a framing sentence. What obviously needs to happen under that is actually really understanding with individuals, and it is at that individual level, how to take that more people using your own car less into action, which is obviously, as I prefaced at the start of this webinar, the challenge. It is difficult. The words that came through on the word cloud, in fact, be useful to revisit that. Obviously, this whole session has been recorded, so we've got that opportunity to go back and look at it. But the convenience, the habit aspects of all of that is so ingrained that it's going to take time to unwind it and unpick it, and we've got to see it from both sides. So that 6 and 9 one that you really showed, we've got to both look at it from both sides and help each other. Questions? I'm just seeing if there's any coming through. I mean, just some of it's fantastic. People obviously got a festive break coming up with some time to perhaps read some books. So, Kirsten, thank you. Yeah, could you please share the titles and authors of the books that you mentioned during the webinar? For sure, let's get them circulated.
Yep.
There's one here. This might be in future sessions, but is there a way to have sort of conversations on mass? That's a really good question. We don't often have one-to-one conversations.
Yeah, so en masse, what we do is we take the most common objections. So you can still do it in a predictive dialogue way, but we're going to do it in a bigger, broader way. So it might go a little bit like this. Before I came into this meeting today, I was wondering how I could address the majority of your concerns. And then we'll probably list the majority of the concerns. And then we'll go, I'm sure if some of you are thinking of this, other people will be, which is true. And then we'll just do the common ones and go through them in our predictive dialogue. So for example, dropping the children off. I know many of you in the team have to drop your children off, and that's a concern for you. I know that some of you are very used to traveling and have been doing it by car for the last 10 years. I know that some of you don't have the same transport links that other people do. So we address the concerns of the masses at the very beginning.
Brilliant. There was one from Lindsay here saying, Nicky, how do you respond if people have beliefs they absolutely won't shift from?
Yeah, and so most of us have beliefs that we absolutely won't shift from, if we're honest. I include myself in that. And it's about becoming more consciously aware. So I'm going to share with you a quote that an FBI, a really experienced FBI agent, once shared with me. And he said this to me. He said, Nick, your job, you cannot change people. You cannot change them. Okay, the only thing that you have any control over is how you choose to respond. Now, the word respond is very different from react. React is emotional, respond is logical. So all we can do, all that we have in our power is to influence and persuade people. And the more that we build relationships with people and get them to trust us, the more likely they are to change their behavior. Some people will come on board early, some people will come on board later, and some people will never come on board. And then, of course, there's always choices to be made with organizations and people and what that looks like. So if we can deal with the majority of people, those that will come on board early and those that will come on a bit later, and somebody's written here, Stephanie, thank you for this, but we shouldn't forget that even if someone can't change their behavior at the time, having the conversation sows the seed. And as we said right at the very beginning, negotiation is a series of conversations and about recognizing what's going on for individuals where you can, and about having conversations that will lead to that change gradually, bit by bit, sowing those seeds, showing advantages, collaborating, making life a little bit easier for people that have that resistance, whatever that might be.
A question I'm thinking about is you mentioned about some people will get it or follow you on the journey at the start, and others will follow, others will come later. How do you use those advocates? How do you use those, particularly thinking about conversations in mass? How do you then draw in those people who are starting to change behaviour?
And that's a really interesting question there, Graham. And I was just thinking about my old world, and I'll give you an example. So when we trust somebody, we are more likely to listen to what they say, and we're more likely to take an action for them. So I was negotiating with a guy in a tree. He'd escaped from a burglary, and he'd been bitten by a police dog. He'd been hit by a police officer. He still managed to get up a tree on a railway branch that was over the main railway line in and out of London, and it was costing a fortune. And we were there for 13 hours. I couldn't get him to budge. We tried all of our tactics that we possibly could, and then his grandma turned up on scene. And as soon as his grandma turned up on scene, there was a visible change in him. And we suggested to him that he'd like to talk to his grandma. Here was a woman that he listened to. Here was a woman that he trusted. She came along, had a conversation with him. 5 minutes later, he said, I'll come down, but only if I can have some of my grandma's fried chicken and rice before I go to prison. And I'm like, yes, collaboration, perfect, thank you. And I use that example because he trusted her. So if you can get people on board and they then have natural conversations with other people within the team, and other people within the team trust them because they see them, because we like people who are like us. We don't necessarily trust people that are in authority for whatever reason. We might not think that they've got our best interests at heart. So then if we do have those people that, let's say they're converted, I'll just use that word for ease, and they trust them, then you're more likely to get a breakdown in that resistance, and they're more likely to change their behavior. It's like Google reviews. If you see a review or a referral from somebody that you trust, it's called social proofing. In the Influence and Persuasion book, I referred to the Laws of Influence and Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. It's in that book and explains in more detail how that works.
That's brilliant. That's a great thing, the chicken and rice story, because actually I'm looking at one question here, which actually, how important do you think incentives are for assisting with influencing behaviour change? There was an incentive. There was actually something there at the end of the line for that person to kind of go, okay, it's a reward. But incentives, that's one thing to look at. I mean, there's so many questions here. Maybe thinking about that, but also I'm thinking here a couple of really good ones around how do you deal with myths and beliefs that are driven by misinformation? That's another. Then another one, which is about, we're talking about controlled environments potentially, or fairly controlled environments. How can you bring this thinking and way of communicating into public consultations as well? Maybe tackle those three if I haven't thrown too many at once. Incentive, misinformation, consultation.
So misinformation. So communication breaks down generally when there's a lack of communication or no communication. And what happens is people make it up. And then they'll keep talking about it, and suddenly the made up story becomes true because that's what we're all talking about. So the way to combat that is quite easy, is to put out loads of communication and loads of information that people can go and refer to and see what's happening, even if you think it's irrelevant. Because often as leaders, we have a lot going on in our minds and we're privy to information that perhaps other people are not privy to. And so we have to remind ourselves that those people who are working in a different role might need different information, but they will definitely make it up if they get no information. And we all know that to be true because we do it all the time. Second one, when you talk about incentives, for the guy in the tree, it was about control. So he wanted to still be in control. And when we're in control, we come at the world from a logical point of view rather than an emotional point of view. So if you're telling me I now can't drive and I have to get the train, I'm not in control anymore. You've taken one of my choices away and I feel like I'm not in control. If we reframe it, so for example, if you ever want, here's a top tip for you if you've got young kids. If you ever want your kids to do the homework, you say this to them: are you going to do your homework before or after dinner? So we're reframing it where they think they have choice, but they have no choice. And we can do the same with people around traveling to work. How can you reframe that to make them feel that they've got choice, but actually the choice is narrower and then they still feel in control? And then the third part of the question, I can't remember what the third
yeah, it
part
was just
sorry.
about, there was a really interesting one here around, is it possible to use these techniques in a public meeting consultation? I guess the thinking here is you're getting thrown an awful lot of stuff at you. I guess the same things apply in the sense of trying to think about all those questions that might be coming through. But yeah, it's a slightly less controlled, you're not quite sure who's going to be turning up, I guess.
Yeah, it's you don't have control over that. Again, if you sit down and use the first P of the 4 Ps, which is plan, like purpose and plan, then it just helps you to settle down and it helps you to think about it, because the majority of people will have the same question and the same fears and the same concerns. And remember, it's all about them. When you've got, when you yourself, you've got a change coming up and you're fearful of it, or something's happening in your life, and then somebody says, oh, actually, I've had this experience, and you see you're not the only person in the world, it just makes life a little bit easier. So we can address those again in that predictive dialogue. I did just see something that really made me smile on here. That was my go-to around children. That was my go-to strategy around, are you going to do your homework before or after? There's a question in there about neurodiversity, which I'll cover really quickly, is that, yes, of course it plays a part. All the answers to your questions are in the individual in front of you, if that makes sense. So we can plan, we plan for majority. When we have difference, then all the answers are in the person in front of you. So it's about talking to that person and seeing what their belief is and how they react and respond, and then building a relationship and asking big open questions, lots of reassurance to work out what's going on for them.
I guess that's kind of tied into the one just above, which is about, doing a deep dive. I guess where you've got those specific cases, that's where you really need that deep dive. You have to ask lots of open questions as is being suggested there. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think we're a few seconds away from the hour, but thank you so much, Nicky. As mentioned, this is part 1 of 3. 23rd of January is part 2. But for now, I think I'll close this one off. Obviously, other questions will come back to people where we can, where obviously they're not anonymous. But thank you. Enjoy the festive break. And look forward to the next one in 2025.